We're talking about the civil war in Syria and the start of peace talks in Switzerland this week. Joining me in Washington is a senior political advisor and strategist for the Syrian American Council, Mohammed Ghanem, and from Damascus, Bassem Abu Abdullah. Dr. Abdullah is a professor of international relations at Damascus University and the director of the Damascus Center for Strategic Studies. Dr. Abdullah, why don't I begin with you? I saw a journalist from the region who said, when you think about this, you have an opposition that's been trying to topple this government for 3 years. You've had a government that's trying to crush the opposition for 3 years. And the fact that they can come together in a room in Switzerland is a major accomplishment. And in a sense, he's right. But is it enough? Where do we go from here?
I think Geneva is a station in this long process. The question here is not between a Syrian government and opposition. We should understand that the Syrian crisis is an internal crisis, but it has a regional and international crisis because we could see the international community, United Nations, the whole, they met in Geneva 2nd. I think that with this position, what we have heard from Mr. John Kerry and from other sides, it was not a constructive positions. Anyway, I think that the Syrian crisis is relevant not only to Syria. We should know that it's relevant to other files in the region, and the United States trying to put with Russia now, trying to put this fight on the track. This is the first step, and we should wait maybe more time.
Mohammed, obviously remarkable bringing both sides together in a room. But where do we go from here?
So the opposition is going to Geneva in hopes that this presents an opportunity to end the suffering of the Syrian people, to end the violence in Syria. Unfortunately, given the conduct of the regime's Minister of Foreign Affairs yesterday, and the fact that he was downright rude to Ban Ki-moon, to other delegates, he was supposed to talk for 10 minutes. He spoke for 25 minutes, kept interrupting everyone. Given yesterday's speeches and the speeches that they did yesterday, we're skeptical about the prospects for these negotiations. The opposition yesterday spoke, finished within the allotted time, and they said this whole conference is organized around the Geneva Communique of June 2012, which is about establishing or forming a transitional governing body to move the country, transition the country into a post-Assad era and put an end to the suffering of the Syrian people. And the opposition yesterday said, we're going to fully cooperate with this. We're ready to sign on to the Geneva Communique. Do we have any partners in this room? And there was no response. The only response they got from the opposition delegation, from the Assad regime's delegation, was bullying and intimidation, unfortunately.
Well, you know, he's making a point about this roadmap that was carved out some time ago. It never went anywhere. Is the government this time willing to really take the steps needed to really move forward?
We should notice that the declaration of Geneva 1 in June 2012, the Syrian government didn't participate, first of all. Secondly, at that time, the Syrian government expressed its opinion that concerning what they called it a transition government, they mentioned that the Syrian government is not accepting. The third point, which is very important, that the situation generally in Syria, the controlling of the ground from the Syrian army is developing, and the atmosphere, the public opinion, the collapsing of what they call the Friends of Syria, what's going on inside Turkey now, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, everything is changed now. So when you are speaking about transition government, mainly it's a Syrian dialogue. It's not the question of America when United States want to appoint for Syria who is president, who is minister, or who is prime minister. This is not acceptable. But anyway, if we want that, we need a serious dialogue between all aspects of opposition with the Syrian government to decide what we want exactly.
If you'll excuse me, with your permission here, the Syrian people cannot exercise their free will because they're being lobbed with Scud missiles, they're being gassed, they were gassed with chemical weapons. Your regime is lobbing barrel bombs on the Syrian people, so that more than 130,000 people have been killed, 6.8 million people have been displaced, you have 2.5 million in refugee camps, half of them are children. So obviously the Syrian people cannot exercise their will. And by the way, the regime in Geneva isn't really negotiating with the opposition. The regime is negotiating with the women and the children who want to go back home, who are right now have to deal with freezing snows and bitter cold in the refugee camps in a bunch of countries.
Let's Let's check. First of all, Professor Ghanem, I don't know where he is living in America. I am living in Damascus. I am speaking with you from Damascus. I am stronger than you.
That's because the opposition can't operate in Damascus. We would get killed.
First of all, most of the opposition, they are living outside of Syria. Outside of Syria. There is opposition inside Syria. I am living here. There is a sanctions against Syrian people. And we should ask about the reasons of this humanitarian situation. Who sent these people? Who sent terrorists from more than 83 states around the world? Now there is reports from United States itself. You can read the report of Brookings Institute about the financing of terrorist group from Kuwait. Before this, what they called it revolution.
Let me ask you this question, please. Who is on the ground now? Let me ask you this question, please. By the way, a few months ago I was in Aleppo, so I also go to Syria. Who is fighting the Al-Qaeda now on the ground? The opposition is locked in a bitter battle against the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, Al-Qaeda affiliated group.
Why
isn't the Assad regime? Why isn't the Assad regime shelling Al-Qaeda? Why is the opposition fighting Al-Qaeda?
The main leaders, don't disinform information. The main leader of opposition declared many times that Al-Nusra is part of our opposition, either if they are against the regime.
Al-Qaeda has carried out
Daesh and either.
Al-Qaeda.
Let
me give you some hard facts.
Hold on for just a second, gentlemen. Let's just move on to a couple other questions, because John Kerry, you mentioned John Kerry. You were upset at what he had to say in Geneva, not in Geneva, but in Switzerland, that President Assad must step aside. But give me an idea of what this country would look like if he were to step aside, which is obviously something that Mohammed would like. What would it look like, Dr. Abdullah, if Assad were to go?
The question not would be with President Assad. It's not personalization of the question. Personalization of the question in Syria, it's something they are doing especially because this is part of the media propaganda and, psychological war. Because they are targeting everything in Syria. When they are destroying schools, universities, factories, when the Turkish government participated sending every day, we know the number of the flights, how many weapons they send, and we know the role of CIA and the role of the meat in Turkey and the role of Saudi Arabia. If this revolution supported from the dictatorship in Saudi Arabia or in Qatar, it means this is a lot of many question mark in front of any.
But the question is, what would Syria's future, Dr. Abdullah, for just a moment, please. Can you please address the question that I asked you, which is, what would Syria look like? What would its future be like?
Unfortunately, they don't have an answer. That's the problem. So the opposition went to Geneva because they would like to negotiate transition. They would like to move the country forward. They would like to bring the refugees back home. They would like the internally displaced people to go back home, and have a roof, atop their heads to keep them from, experiencing inclement weather. But the regime is not willing to talk about transition. Every time the opposition tries to talk about negotiations or a transition, it's all they take it all back to Assad. And this should not, so long as Assad is in power, there will be groups fighting to dislodge Assad, and this instability will continue in the country. We need to move the country beyond this family. This family has been in power for 42 years. That's enough. It was the father and now the son. We're in the 21st century. Okay. This is not a monarchy.
Let me give Dr. Abdullah a chance to respond real quick.
Yes, the question not with President Bashar al-Assad. The question with the role of Saudi Arabia, with the role of Qatar. Where is families ruling? Where is no constitutions with the human rights? I am as a Syrian person, I am a Syrian citizen. I want to see all Syrian people living in their houses. But you should ask, who will withdraw these killers who came from more than 83 nationalities? You should read the report of the Washington Institute about how many nationalities came to Syria.
I would like to reiterate.
All right. Gentlemen, I think we're stuck here on the same two issues. Let me ask you. Dr. Abdullah, let me interrupt for just a moment. Let me ask one final question to both of you. Optimistic or pessimistic that we'll get something done in Switzerland? And we'll start with you, Mohammed.
We are skeptical. We would love to see Geneva yield something better for the future of Syria for our people. We are, given the conduct of the Assad regime and the positions and the fact that even an advisor to the Assad regime can even answer a simple question about the transition, we're deeply skeptical about the prospects.
Deeply skeptical here, Dr. Abdullah. Pessimistic or optimistic? Briefly, please.
I am optimistic in a Syrian army. I am optimistic in Syrian people, and I think the challenge for this opposition, not depending on America, but depending on their people, the ballot box in front of them. They can show us what is their vision for the future of Syria.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on The Heat. Certainly appreciate